Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining. My name is Greg Messino, and I'm a cybersecurity advisor here at Drawbridge. I've been with Drawbridge for a little over 3 years, and my role consists of performing technical assessments like of Office 365 and AWS, as well as penetration testing and general cybersecurity consulting for our clients. Today, I'll be presenting on effective cybersecurity strategies for your business. So taking a look at the agenda, we're going to go over what the current cyber risk landscape is, spend a bulk of the time on quick wins for cybersecurity. We'll touch briefly on advanced risk reduction methods, and then finally we'll have some conclusion and Q&A. The goal of this presentation is to provide you with low risk reduction strategies for your firm, low effort risk reduction strategies. So the criteria I selected for this is number 1, low or no cost solutions. Number 2 is low impact to employee workflow. And then 3 is specific to the most common types of attacks. So we're not going to be doing anything like multi-factor authentication, full-blown MDR rollouts, or reduction of local admin rights, because that doesn't meet the criteria, although effective strategies for reducing cyber risk. So when we're looking at the current threat landscape, email has to be the focus. Email-related attacks appear to be the most common and most likely to be successful. Phishing to steal credentials, malicious links, attachments, or even QR codes are on the rise. And once an attacker is in, either email blasts from contacts like spam or wire fraud attempts are very likely to occur. And we know what the impact is. It's going to be loss of reputation, and it's going to be financial loss. If a fraudulent wire goes out or if you need to pay ransom, these can really add up. So what are the quick wins for cybersecurity? I'm going to first take you through this list, and then I'm going to discuss each of these items in more detail. If you're quick and you've already read through this list, there's nothing extremely groundbreaking here, but I'd like to take an opportunity to dive deep into each one of these to hopefully provide additional value, some tips and tricks, and maybe some of the dark arts associated with the cybersecurity. The first and likely most impactful is employee awareness and training. This can include phishing simulations to employees, annual cyber training, or ad hoc or department-specific training. To get the most value out of phishing simulations, context is important. So creating realistic and varied scenarios can help assess different skill levels among staff, ranging from obvious phishes to more targeted ones. Think about the difference between like a FedEx phishing email that requests you to click a phishing FedEx link to track your package versus an email from your manager asking you to review a document. There's different degrees of difficulty associated with those. And something I've learned at Drawbridge is that you can really make these simulations so realistic and so targeted that almost everyone clicks on them. That's a little secret associated with these simulations, is that they're really hard to beat if you put in all of the specific details. So why is this type of technique not really common practice? I think it's mostly because it hurts morale, right? If everyone clicks on a phishing email, that's not good for the company. But I think it's also because you want to protect against the most common types of attacks that employees see. So creating a more realistic simulation is more helpful from a training perspective compared to a simulation that people will click on, but not realistic. The tip here is if every once in a while you want to turn up the difficulty, this can be an effective strategy, but just not something that you want to do consistently. Also, feeding the simulation specific firm information like an org chart can lead to more convincing messages. This can be helpful for positioning the language and having different to and from addresses. Next on this one is considering segmenting the simulations based off of department or risk level. So sending finance-related simulations to the finance team and sending HR simulations to HR. Straightforward, but effective. And what I've found is that it's difficult to create a single phishing email that is effective for the entire company. And if you separate by department, it makes it more realistic and more likely to be effective for training. For more mature firms, considering advanced social engineering techniques like phishing or smishing to target executives could have some value. These types of simulations often include information gathered from LinkedIn or other public data. You may see these types of techniques on penetration testing, but they do have some value. Let's look a little bit deeper at the annual cyber training component. This is an extremely straightforward exercise where staff is trained on the cyber landscape, best practices, and common threats. Something that can be missed is the need to cover new employees. Having an annual cyber training, but including cyber training within onboarding, can be a blind spot. New employees love to post about their new job on LinkedIn. This is very common. But attackers also love LinkedIn because they know when someone starts a new job. A very, very common technique attackers will do is target new employees with text messages from the CEO or the fake CEO. I'm sure most of you have seen these, and they almost never work for anyone who's been with the company longer than a couple months because they know the company culture, but is actually quite effective for new employees. We've had many clients fall for these types of attacks. So 2 suggestions here. Conduct cyber training within the first day or so of an employee starting a job with a focus early on that first day. Waiting a week or 2 weeks is not enough. And the second part is instruct these new employees to wait a few weeks before they post on LinkedIn. This is super valuable. It's really going to reduce the inbound attacks to these individuals who are most susceptible before training and culture really sets in. Last takeaway here is not all cyber training needs to be company-wide. One of the most successful attacks we see is wire fraud. So performing specific training regarding wire fraud to the accounts payable or finance team has a lot of merit. Most finance departments will have some sort of callback procedure. That's really the standard nowadays, but the details make the difference within the policy. So not accepting inbound calls for confirmation and using known good contact numbers are a few of those details that can be trained up on. Next on the list is policy creation and updates. Not the most exciting, and really, truthfully, not the most impactful if you compare to many of the others on this list, but still hits the mark for the stated criteria. And just like with the employee awareness and training, I want to dig into this a little bit more. So at Drawbridge, we really focus on the big 3 when it comes to security policies: the information security policy, the business continuity plan, and the incident response plan. This is what the SEC wants. This is what investors want. This is what we focus on. So most of you know that we need policies, but the most important characteristic of these policies is that they are accurate to the firm's current environment. These policies should not be treated as a roadmap or about to implement the list. This is especially true for the WISP, which is basically an outline of your entire cyber program. The good news is the WISP is an extremely flexible document. Sections can be added, removed, modified, and language can be soft or strict. Including specific sections like data destruction, change management, or data privacy can help reduce the number of policies that you'll need to manage and interact with. So these all could be separate documents: data destruction, change management. You could have that separate, but I found it's easier for operational purposes that you contain that within the WISP. It's just easier to limit the amount of documents that you're maintaining. And the last tip or trick here is strict versus soft language. We already know most important factor is that the policies are accurate to your current environment, but sometimes our clients get a little nervous that if they only put what they are doing within their policy, then they will look insecure to whoever is requesting these documents. This is where some soft language could come into play. So something like employees are instructed to avoid personal device use, or employees are trained on how to sensitive data to third parties. Words like should, trained, or instructed can help increase the perception of your security without being inaccurate. Next on the list is tabletop exercises. So a tabletop is a great way to improve incident readiness for the most common types of attacks. And for those who don't know, a typical tabletop exercise brings in team members from different departments like IT, finance, HR, operations, as well as the incident response team. Then the organizer will guide conversations and ask questions to stress test the incident response plan and to highlight gaps and to increase the resilience of the company and really the policies themselves. So a few tips for the tabletops. One is bringing in a technical resource from either your internal IT or outsourced IT. It's really important to have the people actually clicking the buttons think about how they will react given a specific scenario. This can be a helpful training exercise for IT, but more so I've found helpful to the others in the room, the executives, so they will know what to expect in these situations. Consider ransomware and how the first step is often disconnecting devices from the environment. If ransomware were to infect half the firm's devices, that means half the company would be without a computer. These types of conversations can identify potential operational gaps and lead to further discussion down the road. Next tip for tabletops is focusing on realistic high-risk scenarios. So business email compromise, wire fraud, ransomware. These are really the most common, and they should mostly be included in all of these tabletop exercises. If you've done these recently, maybe you want to change a couple of them out, but I found it's important to hit the most likely ones to succeed, even if you've scenarioed them in the past. And then using your existing policies as a guide. So this point cascades nicely from the previous one of updating your key documents. By leveraging the policies, it will help guide the conversation, but also highlight issues or items that need to get updated on those policies. Next here is risk assessments. So risk assessments made it into this list because you can self-assess using in-house resources for free, but also because this, alongside your policies, will be the foundation of your entire cyber program. So that's why I added it in here, and that's why I think it's important. These assessments can be high level, so they can be targeting the cyber risk of the entire firm, or they can be specific or targeted, like to an individual application or service like Microsoft 365. When done for the entire firm, this essentially acts as a roadmap or allows for easy prioritization of future projects. And then when done against a specific piece of technology, this can really highlight serious flaws in the design and configuration of the setup. Microsoft is, well, not really, I'm not picking on Microsoft. All cloud environments have very insecure default settings, and they also just change settings without letting you know pretty consistently. So you may think you're secure and because you're using one of these cloud platforms, but once you get in there, it's important to review the actual configuration to see if there are any gaps. And I've found that firms can sometimes avoid risk assessments because they don't think they can appropriately handle the remediation efforts found from these assessments. But my approach is that more information is generally better. Now, that's not always true when regulators get involved, but it's generally true, right? But there's a more important factor here, and there's two different strategies that are effective coming out of a risk assessment. You could focus on the critical and high findings first, which will ultimately have the biggest impact on risk reduction. But another effective strategy is focusing on just the low impact findings, which is really the guiding principle of this presentation, right? Focus on the easy stuff. Resolving 5 low risk items quickly within a day or a week, which is possible, can often build momentum and lead to a snowball effect for future projects. And at the very least, you've just removed five risks from your report. Now, granted, they're low, but it's 5 less risks that you had previously. The last item I'll touch on here is outsourcing your cyber program. So now this is certainly not free, but it often saves time at the end of the day. Investors and regulators look for outsourced cyber providers that are separate from your IT provider, so there are no conflicts of interest and proper checks and balances are in place. Many of the items on this list can be performed using internal resources, but it's often worth considering outsourcing cyber to a trusted third party. All right, so I want to have the second half or second bit of this presentation on impactful but challenging strategies. So we're going to look at some of the more advanced strategies to contrast the low effort strategies from the last slide. I'll just be touching these at a high level, and perhaps we can dive into them further on a future webinar. Let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in. So we have zero trust, we have privileged access management, we have cloud security hardening, and we have DLP. The zero trust model or zero trust architecture, you may have heard this, microsegmentation is sometimes another phrasing of it. The high-level definition is that, which is the approach from trust but verify, which is kind of a well-known system, to never trust, always verify. A little abstract. To get it a little bit more specific, it essentially means that every device, every user only has access to the resources that they need. This typically starts with least privilege, which most everybody is doing already, but moves into microsegmentation and then longer term, like third-party tools that are specifically focused on zero trust. Next on the list is privileged access management. So PAM focuses on securing and managing the accounts that have the highest level of access and authority within an organization. So think about accounts with the global admin role within Microsoft 365 or domain admin from traditional AD. By enforcing strict controls over the privileged accounts, PAM helps to protect the keys to the kingdom, is the term, and prevents a compromised account resulting in a tenant takeover. These accounts need to be secured the most, but also adding layers in, like PAM, can help reduce impact if one of these accounts were to be compromised. So employees with The reason why this made this list is because employees with privileged accounts like IT or executives often resist these restrictions because it requires a change in workflow or additional steps to access systems. Next on the list is cloud security hardening. So the reason why this made it on the list is because many of the hardening techniques involve limiting access to firm resources from trusted locations or even better, trusted devices. And this essentially does a couple things. One, it removes the ability for personal devices to be used, which can be impactful to employees, but also requires firm managed devices to interact or locations. So this can be a huge impact to employees depending on what your current setup is. But we kind of see this basically being the standard within the next year or so, at the same vein of MFA from 5 or 10 years ago. Once this is in place, you have this device restriction to access firm resources. Successful phishing attacks go way down. Now, it's only a matter of the time before attackers adapt to these techniques. But for the most part, right now, if you have device restriction, you're in a good spot. Last on this impactful but challenging strategy list is DLP. And really, this is just the prevention of sensitive information leaving the org that is unauthorized, right? Sensitive data leaves the organization every day, but that's part of the business. Part of the DLP that should be discussed is preventing the unauthorized access. And the reason why this made the list is there are third-party apps that can help with DLP, but oftentimes there's initial setup that's required. Data tagging, classification, knowing who has access to what data. That can often be a manual process that needs to happen internally before you could even implement the DLP on top of it. So these are the impactful but challenging strategies, and they're worth considering after you have your foundation in place. All right, looking at next steps. Starting with easy wins, right? This has kind of been the focus on this presentation. Achievable goals initially, build momentum for larger projects. It's an effective strategy alongside targeting high and critical risks specifically. So it's worth considering. And then planning for long-term strategies, hardening cloud environments, considering zero trust. Once you have your foundational cyber program in place, the longer-term strategies can cascade on top of it. And then obviously consider Drawbridge services. We can assist and chat about any of these items in much more detail.
Great, thank you. And this brings us to the end of our webinar. So Greg, thank you very much for your insights and answering the questions. And thank you so much for your time, everyone, today.
Take care, everybody.